England, December 1838. Christmas Eve. Henry Ashbourne, Duke of Northmore, had 3 cardinal rules for surviving the London social season. Avoid matchmaking mothers, never attend events involving excessive sentimentality, and under no circumstances allow oneself to be caught in compromising situations with unmarried ladies. On the 23rd of December 1838, he spectacularly violated all 3. The Mayfair Christmas Fair sprawled across Berkeley Square like a particularly enthusiastic invasion of festive chaos. Garlands of evergreen draped between lampposts, vendors hawked roasted chestnuts and mulled wine, and the scent of cinnamon and pine saturated the crisp winter air. Snow had fallen the previous evening, transforming London into something approximating a picturesque winter landscape, provided one ignored the mud, the crowds, and the persistent smell of horse droppings that even festive decoration couldn't entirely mask. Henry had attended under duress. His sister, the formidable Lady Margaret Thornbury, had threatened to arrive at Northmore House and physically drag him from his library if he didn't make an appearance. "You cannot spend another Christmas brooding over ledgers like some Dickensian miser," she'd declared. "Show your face, buy something charitable, pretend to enjoy humanity for precisely 1 hour." He'd managed 47 minutes when disaster struck. It began innocuously enough. Henry stood before a ribbon merchant's stall, contemplating whether his sister would prefer emerald or sapphire trimming for her spring bonnet. A ridiculous exercise, as Margaret invariably chose whatever he didn't select, when he heard a soft gasp behind him. He turned just in time to see a young woman, elegantly dressed in a burgundy traveling pelisse with Spanish-style embroidery, sway dangerously on her feet. Her eyes, remarkable dark eyes that he registered even in that split second, rolled backward, and she pitched forward like a felled tree. Instinct overrode propriety. Henry lunged forward, arms outstretched. What followed was perhaps the least graceful rescue in the history of English nobility. The woman was taller than he'd anticipated, and possessed what could only be described as impressively poor timing. As she fell, her reticule swung upward, catching Henry squarely across the jaw. Her bonnet, a confection of velvet and netting, dislodged entirely and flew 3 feet to the left, landing in a basket of gingerbread. Meanwhile, her body, despite Henry's most valiant efforts, seemed determined to slide through his arms with all the cooperative spirit of buttered silk. "Steady, no, not that way," Henry grunted, attempting to adjust his grip while simultaneously preventing them both from crashing into the ribbon merchant's display. His boot caught on a cobblestone. They lurched sideways. The woman's head lolled against his shoulder, her hair, dark and glossy as a raven's wing, tumbling from its pins and cascading down his waistcoat. A package tucked under his arm, Margaret's Christmas gift, a leather-bound volume of poetry, launched itself into the air and landed with a splash in a nearby water trough. "Your Grace!" the ribbon merchant yelped. "Is the lady unwell?" "Quite obviously," Henry managed through gritted teeth, still struggling to prevent his unconscious burden from achieving complete horizontal status. The woman weighed considerably more than she appeared, not that he would ever voice such an ungentlemanly observation, and seemed to possess an uncanny ability to become heavier with each passing second. A crowd materialized with the supernatural speed that London crowds always employed when scandal presented itself. "What happened?" demanded a portly gentleman in a ridiculous orange waistcoat. "Did he strike her?" gasped a matron clutching a frankly enormous goose. "She's fainted," announced a young boy helpfully. "Fetch the constable," suggested someone from the back. "I did not strike her," Henry said firmly, attempting dignity while still grappling with a sliding unconscious woman. She collapsed. "I merely attempted to. Heavens, could someone please—" "Set her down, Your Grace," called the chestnut vendor. "On the ground. More dignified that way." Henry stared at the muddy, snow-covered cobblestones, and then at the woman's clearly expensive clothing. "Absolutely not." "Where's her companion?" demanded the matron with the goose, which was now honking aggressively. "No respectable lady travels alone?" "I haven't the faintest notion," Henry replied, shifting his grip again, as the woman's head lolled dangerously close to sliding off his shoulder entirely. "I've never seen her before in my life." This statement, perfectly true, nevertheless sounded supremely suspicious when delivered, while holding an unconscious woman in an intimate embrace before an audience of 30 scandalized Londoners. "She's foreign," announced a vendor of uncertain origin, gesturing at the woman's clothing. "Look at that embroidery. Spanish, I'd wager." "Spanish?" The matron looked positively scandalized, as though Catalina's nationality explained everything from the fainting to the general moral decline of society. "Someone locate her companion," Henry ordered, mustering his most ducal authority, despite his increasingly precarious position. The woman had now begun to slip sideways again, and he was forced to execute an awkward shuffling step to compensate. There must be someone accompanying her. "I'll check the fabric stalls," volunteered the helpful boy. "I'll inquire at the sweet shop," offered a young woman with exceptional enthusiasm. "I'll fetch my sausage," announced an elderly gentleman, which seemed entirely irrelevant, but was met with general approval nonetheless. Henry, arms aching and dignity in tatters, made an executive decision born of desperation and the increasingly loud whispers speculating about whether he'd compromised the mysterious foreign lady. "My carriage," he announced. "I'm taking her to Northmoor House and summoning a physician. If anyone knows this lady or her companion, send word immediately to Grosvenor Square." "Very proper, Your Grace," approved the matron, though her expression suggested she found nothing proper about any of this. "Romantic, more like," giggled someone. "Scandalous," corrected someone else. Henry ignored them all. He turned, still clutching his burden, and nearly collided with his coachman Jameson, who'd appeared with remarkable timing. "Situation, Your Grace?" Jameson inquired with the studied neutrality of a servant who'd witnessed 3 decades of aristocratic peculiarity. "Medical emergency," Henry replied crisply. "Northmoor House, immediately. Send word to Dr. Phillips." "Very good, Your Grace." Together, they maneuvered the unconscious woman toward the waiting carriage, a process that involved Henry walking backward, Jameson providing directional guidance, and both of them narrowly avoiding a caroling group that had chosen this precise moment to launch into an aggressively cheerful rendition of "God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen." Getting the woman into the carriage proved another exercise in controlled chaos. She remained utterly unconscious, which meant Henry had to lift her bodily up the steps while Jameson supported from behind, and a growing crowd offered increasingly unhelpful suggestions. "Mind her head! Watch the hem! Is she breathing? Should we summon a priest?" "She's fainted, not dying," Henry snapped, finally succeeding in depositing her across the carriage seat. He climbed in after her, attempting to arrange her into something approximating a respectable position, a futile exercise, as unconscious people possessed no sense of propriety whatsoever. Her head lolled against the velvet squabs. One arm dangled over the edge of the seat. Her traveling pelisse had twisted awkwardly, revealing a dress of deep blue silk beneath. Quality fabric, he noted, which suggested wealth and status and complications he didn't have time to contemplate. "Grosvenor Square," Henry instructed Jameson. "Quickly." The carriage lurched into motion. Henry settled across from his unconscious guest, acutely aware that he was now alone in an enclosed space with an unknown, unmarried woman, precisely the sort of compromising situation his third cardinal rule specifically prohibited. He studied her properly for the first time. She was beautiful in an unconventional way. Strong features, a face too expressive for classical English standards, skin with the warm olive tone that spoke of Mediterranean sun. Her lips, slightly parted in unconsciousness, curved in a way that suggested she smiled often. Her hands, elegant and long-fingered, bore no rings. No rings, no wedding band, no betrothal ring. Henry's jaw tightened. An unmarried foreign woman of quality, unaccompanied at a public fair, now being transported to a bachelor duke's residence. If this became public knowledge, the scandal would be extraordinary. The carriage rattled through London's evening traffic. Snow had begun falling again, soft flakes drifting past the windows. Gas lamps flickered to life along the streets, casting golden pools across the gathering darkness. The woman didn't stir. Henry watched her breathe, steady, regular breaths that at least confirmed she wasn't dying, and wondered what catastrophic sequence of events had led to him spending Christmas Eve with an unconscious stranger. His sister would find this hilarious. Northmoor House materialized from the snow-draped evening like a monument to architectural restraint. 4 stories of pale bathstone, symmetrical windows, and absolutely no excessive ornamentation. Henry had always appreciated its severe elegance, the way it communicated wealth without vulgarity, power without pretension. Tonight, Its orderly calm felt like a sanctuary. The carriage halted before the entrance. Jameson appeared instantly, lowering the steps. Henry prepared himself for the awkward task of extracting an unconscious woman from a carriage without causing injury, indignity, or further scandal. "Careful, Your Grace," Jameson murmured, positioning himself to assist. Together they managed the extraction with considerably more grace than the initial capture. Henry lifted her carefully, supporting her head against his shoulder. She smelled, he noticed involuntarily, like orange blossom and cinnamon, and carried her up the steps. The door swung open before he reached it. His butler, Henderson, stood in the doorway, expression carefully neutral, despite the unprecedented sight of his employer carrying an unconscious woman across the threshold. "Henderson, guest suite, immediately. Dr. Phillips has been sent for. Expected within the hour, Your Grace." Henderson's gaze flicked to the woman, then back to Henry's face. "Shall I summon Mrs. Davies to attend the lady?" "Yes, and send someone to the Mayfair Christmas fair immediately, discreetly to inquire after a missing companion. This lady was unaccompanied when she collapsed." "Very good, Your Grace." The guest suite occupied the east wing's second floor, a spacious chamber decorated in cream and gold, with a four-poster bed that had hosted visiting dignitaries, distant relatives, and once, memorably, an Italian soprano who demanded rose petals in her bath. Henry deposited his burden carefully onto the bed, stepping back immediately to preserve propriety, now that Mrs. Davies, the formidable housekeeper, had arrived. "Heavens above," Mrs. Davies breathed, approaching the bed. "Who is she?" "Unknown," Henry admitted. "She collapsed at the Christmas fair. No companion in evidence. I couldn't simply leave her on the street." "Of course not, Your Grace." Mrs. Davies' tone suggested she found nothing surprising about her employer's habit of collecting inconvenient responsibilities. She began efficiently removing the woman's pelisse and boots. "Foreign, by her clothing. Spanish, according to the ribbon merchant." "Spanish, Mrs." Davies repeated, as though filing away this intelligence for future reference. "Well, she's breathing steadily. No visible injuries. We'll make her comfortable and wait for Dr. Phillips." Henry nodded, retreating toward the door. He should leave. Propriety demanded it. Mrs. Davies would manage everything with her characteristic efficiency. Yet he found himself hesitating, studying the woman's face one more time. In repose, she looked younger, perhaps 25, though it was difficult to judge. Her expression held an unexpected serenity, as though unconsciousness had brought relief rather than distress. What troubles had driven her to faint in a crowded marketplace? "Your Grace?" Mrs. Davies prompted gently. "Yes, of course." Henry straightened. "I'll be in my study. Summon me immediately when Dr. Phillips arrives, or if she wakes." "Certainly, Your Grace." He left, closing the door quietly behind him. Dr. Simon Phillips arrived 40 minutes later, tracking snow across the entrance hall and radiating professional competence. He'd served as the Ashbourne family physician for 2 decades and had seen Henry through childhood illnesses, riding accidents, and one memorable incident involving a tree, a dare, and a badly sprained ankle. "Mysterious Spanish lady, Henderson tells me," Phillips said, removing his coat and handing it to a footman. "This is becoming quite the evening." "I appreciate your discretion," Henry replied, leading him toward the guest suite. "Always, Your Grace, though I should mention that half of Mayfair is already speculating about whom you were seen carrying through Berkeley Square. The Duchess of Fairmont sent her footman to inquire after your indisposed guest." Henry closed his eyes briefly. "Wonderful. Gossip travels faster than medical emergencies, I'm afraid." They reached the guest suite. Mrs. Davies had removed the woman's outer clothing and settled her beneath the coverlet. Her dark hair spread across the pillows like spilled ink. She looked peaceful, vulnerable, and entirely too comfortable in Henry's guest bed, a thought he immediately suppressed. Dr. Phillips conducted his examination with quiet efficiency, checking pulse, breathing, pupil response. Henry watched from near the fireplace, arms crossed, attempting to project ducal disinterest, while his mind catalogued every small detail, the way her breathing deepened when Phillips touched her wrist, the slight furrow that appeared between her brows when he lifted her eyelid. "Well?" Henry demanded when the examination concluded. Phillips straightened, returning his instruments to his medical bag. "Her vitals are excellent. No fever, no signs of illness or injury. pulse strong and regular. Then why hasn't she woken? Difficult to say with certainty. The fainting itself could have multiple causes: shock, exhaustion, insufficient nourishment, tight corseting. Phillips gestured vaguely. Ladies' fashion remains medicine's natural enemy. However, continued unconsciousness is unusual. Meaning? Meaning she should have woken by now. Phillips frowned thoughtfully. There's a possibility of head trauma. Did she strike anything when she fell? I caught her, Henry said. Poorly, but I caught her. Then trauma seems unlikely. My assessment would be extreme exhaustion combined with some form of shock or distress. Her body has essentially decided to force rest upon her. When will she wake? Hours, most likely. Possibly by morning. Keep her warm, comfortable. If she doesn't wake by noon tomorrow, send for me again. Phillips snapped his bag closed. I'll leave laudanum in case she wakes in distress, though I don't anticipate it being necessary. And her identity? That, Your Grace, is beyond my medical expertise. Phillips smiled slightly. Though I'd suggest when she does wake, you have a very good explanation prepared for why she's in a bachelor duke's residence. After Phillips departed, Henry stood alone in the guest suite doorway, studying his mysterious visitor. She slept on, undisturbed by scandal, speculation, or the fact that she'd just inadvertently invaded one of London's most carefully ordered lives. Henry's butler appeared silently at his elbow. Your Grace, no word from the fair regarding a missing companion. Shall we continue inquiries? Yes. Expand the search to nearby hotels and boarding houses. Someone must be looking for her. Very good, Your Grace. Henderson withdrew. Henry remained, caught between propriety's demands and an inexplicable reluctance to leave this woman alone in an unfamiliar house. Who are you? He murmured to the sleeping figure. Catalina, though he didn't yet know her name, slept peacefully on, offering no answers. Outside, snow continued falling over London, transforming the city into something magical and strange. Inside Northmoor House, a duke who'd spent 32 years avoiding romantic complications stood guard over an unconscious woman who would change his life forever, though neither of them knew it yet. Lady Catalina de Montemayor woke slowly, consciousness returning in fragments like a puzzle assembling itself in reverse. Softness. She was surrounded by extraordinary softness, sheets that felt like water against her skin, pillows that cradled her head with supernatural comfort. A fire crackled nearby, casting warm light against her closed eyelids. This was not her hotel room. The bed in her suite at the Claridge Hotel possessed mattresses that felt like sleeping atop sacks of disapproving potatoes. These sheets were silk. That fire was real wood, not the smoky coal the hotel provided. Catalina's eyes opened. An unfamiliar ceiling stared back, cream-colored plasterwork, elegant molding, a chandelier of remarkable craftsmanship. Definitely not the Claridge. She sat up carefully, testing her body for injury. Everything seemed functional, if somewhat stiff. She wore her chemise and corset, someone had removed her outer clothing, and sat in a bed approximately twice the size of what any reasonable person required. The room surrounding her looked like something from an architectural journal, perfectly proportioned, expensively furnished, decorated with restraint that suggested wealth so secure it needed no flaunting. Heavy curtains framed tall windows. Beyond them, morning light illuminated snow-covered gardens. Where in heaven's name? The door opened. A middle-aged woman in a housekeeper's dress entered, carrying a tea tray. She stopped abruptly upon seeing Catalina awake. Oh, you're conscious. Excellent. The woman set down the tray and bobbed a small curtsy. I'm Mrs. Davies, miss. How are you feeling? Catalina blinked. The woman's accent was English, her manner professional, her expression kind but guarded. Catalina paused, taking stock. Confused, mostly. Where am I? Northmoor House, miss. Grosvenor Square. The name meant nothing. Catalina's confusion deepened. And how did I arrive here? You fainted at the Christmas fair yesterday evening, miss. His Grace brought you here and summoned Dr. Phillips. You've been unconscious since nearly 14 hours. His Grace? Catalina repeated blankly. The Duke of Northmoor, miss. This is his residence. Catalina's mind, still foggy with sleep and bewilderment, attempted to process this information. She'd fainted. She remembered that much. The crushing crowd, the tight corset, the sudden overwhelming panic about everything. But everything after remained blank. I don't... She pressed fingers to her temples. I can't remember. Mrs. Davies' expression shifted to concern. Can't remember what, miss? Anything after fainting. Catalina looked up, meeting the housekeeper's eyes. I remember the fair, the crowds, then nothing. How did I get here? Who brought me? Where is my companion? His Grace carried you from the fair to his carriage and brought you here, Mrs. Davies explained patiently. As for your companion, we've been searching for them since last evening. No one has come forward. This information should have reassured Catalina. Instead, a strange emptiness opened in her chest, as though something vital had been misplaced and she couldn't identify what. What's your name, miss? Mrs. Davies asked gently. The answer rose automatically. Lady Catalina de Montemayor. Spanish, yes? We thought as much from your clothing. Yes. Catalina nodded, grateful that at least some memories remained intact. From Seville. I'm visiting London for... She stopped. What was she visiting London for? The question hung in her mind unanswered. She knew she'd travelled from Spain, remembered the journey, the ship crossing the Channel, the arrival in Dover, the coach to London. Remembered her father's stern instructions, her companion Elena's nervous chatter. But why had they come? Miss, Mrs. Davies prompted. I'm sorry. Catalina pressed her palms against her eyes. My head feels scattered. I know who I am, where I'm from, but recent events seem unclear. Dr. Phillips mentioned this might happen, Mrs. Davies said soothingly. He said memory loss sometimes accompanies fainting episodes, particularly severe ones. It should return, given time. Should? He was quite confident, miss. Catalina lowered her hands, studying the elegant bedroom with new eyes. This Duke Northmore, you said? I've truly never met him before. His Grace claims you fainted directly into his arms at the Christmas fair. He brought you here because you were alone and unconscious. Very proper of him, really. Something in Mrs. Davies' tone suggested the situation was anything but proper, but Catalina was too disoriented to pursue the implication. I should like to thank him, she said instead, for his kindness. I'll inform His Grace you've woken. He's been most concerned. Mrs. Davies moved toward the door, then paused. There's tea and toast, miss. I'd recommend eating something before attempting to stand. Dr. Phillips said you'd likely be weak. After the housekeeper departed, Catalina attempted the tea, excellent quality, far superior to the dishwater served at the Claridge, and one piece of toast. Her appetite remained absent, chased away by the unsettling feeling of missing pieces in her own life's puzzle. She remembered her childhood in Seville, her father's estates, her mother's death when Catalina was 15, the subsequent years of managing her father's household, the endless social obligations, the gradual realization that she'd become decorative furniture in her own life. She remembered deciding to accept what? The thought slipped away before she could grasp it. Frustrated, Catalina rose from the bed. Mrs. Davies had been correct about weakness. Her legs felt uncertain beneath her, as though she'd been ill for weeks rather than hours. She crossed to the windows slowly, steadying herself against furniture. The view revealed extensive gardens, now snow-covered and beautiful in the morning light, and beyond them what appeared to be a mews and carriage house. Clearly, a London townhouse of substantial means. She'd been rescued by a duke, an English duke she'd never met. The situation would have been absurd even without the inconvenient memory loss. A knock sounded. Catalina turned as the door opened to reveal Mrs. Davies again, this time accompanied by a tall man whose presence seemed to fill the doorway despite his evident attempt at casualness. Lady Catalina, Mrs. Davies announced. His Grace, the Duke of Northmore. The man stepped forward, and Catalina's breath caught. He was handsome in an austere way, sharp features, dark hair slightly dishevelled, eyes the colour of winter storms. He wore mourning attire of studied simplicity, dark coat, grey waistcoat, perfectly tied cravat that somehow still looked slightly uncomfortable on him. His expression combined concern, uncertainty, and what appeared to be profound mortification. Lady Catalina. His voice was deep, carrying the precise diction of England's upper classes. I'm profoundly relieved to see you conscious. How are you feeling? Catalina executed a small curtsy. Her legs wobbled slightly, undermining the dignity, and straightened. Confused, Your Grace. but otherwise well. I understand I owe you considerable thanks." "Not at all." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. Anyone would have done the same. "Would they have carried me to their London residence?" Catalina asked, allowing a hint of amusement into her tone. A faint flush coloured his cheeks. That is, you were unconscious, unaccompanied, and the alternative was leaving you on a muddy street surrounded by gawking strangers. It seemed the more appropriate choice." "It was exceedingly kind," Catalina assured him, "though I confess I cannot remember any of it." His expression sharpened with concern. "Dr. Phillips mentioned possible memory loss." "How extensive?" "I remember who I am and why I'm in England, mostly, but the fair itself and everything after remains blank." She gestured vaguely. "Mrs. Davies said you've been searching for my companion." "Without success thus far, though we've expanded inquiries to all major hotels." He paused, then added carefully, "May I ask what brings you to London? Perhaps that information might help locate your party." The question should have had an easy answer. Instead, Catalina found herself reaching for memories that felt present, but frustratingly out of grasp, like trying to catch reflections in water. "I travelled from Seville with my companion, Elena," she said slowly. "My father arranged the journey. We're staying at the Claridge, I believe, but the purpose of the visit—" She trailed off, brow furrowing. "Take your time," the Duke said gently. Catalina closed her eyes, focusing. Fragments returned. Her father's study, papers being signed, her father's satisfaction, Elena's excited chatter about English society. But the central reason remained elusive, dancing just beyond conscious thought. "Something important," she murmured. "Something that required travelling during winter, which father normally avoids. Something involving contracts and—" The memory slipped away again, leaving frustration in its wake. "This is maddening," she said, opening her eyes. "I know the information exists in my head, I simply cannot access it." "Dr. Phillips assured me such losses are typically temporary," the Duke offered. "The memories should return naturally, without forcing them. I suppose I should be grateful I remember my own name." A slight smile crossed his features, the first crack in his formal reserve. That would indeed make matters more complicated. More complicated than waking in a strange duke's house wearing only my chemise. The flush returned to his cheeks, deeper this time. "Mrs. Davies assures me that all proprieties were observed." "I'm quite certain they were, Your Grace. You seem far too proper to compromise unconscious women." Yes, thank you, I think." He looked genuinely flustered now, which Catalina found oddly endearing. Mrs. Davies, who'd been standing quietly near the door, cleared her throat. "Perhaps Lady Catalina would like her clothing brought, Your Grace. And breakfast?" "Yes, excellent suggestion." The Duke seized the escape route gratefully. "I'll leave you to rest and dress. If you require anything at all, I'll send word," Catalina finished, taking pity on him. "Thank you, Your Grace, for everything." He executed a precise bow and fled. There was no other word for it, closing the door with barely restrained haste. Alone again, Catalina found herself smiling at the closed door. The Duke of Northmoor, it seemed, was utterly unprepared for unplanned houseguests, particularly foreign ones who made jokes about propriety while standing in their chemises. How refreshing. An hour later, dressed in her recovered clothing, only slightly worse for its adventures, Catalina descended Northmoor House's grand staircase on legs that felt marginally steadier. The butler Henderson materialized at the bottom with supernatural timing. "Lady Catalina, His Grace has requested you join him for breakfast in the morning room. May I show you the way?" "Please." She followed him through corridors that spoke of generations of wealth, portraits of stern-faced ancestors, marble busts, furniture that had probably witnessed the signing of the Magna Carta. Everything impeccably maintained, everything in perfect order. The morning room proved an exception, a space that felt lived in rather than displayed. Books littered surfaces, newspapers lay scattered across a side table, and a painting in progress occupied an easel near the windows. Sunshine streamed through glass, turning the room golden. The Duke stood near the breakfast sideboard, examining a letter with evident displeasure. He looked up as she entered, immediately setting the letter aside. "Lady Catalina, please, sit. I've had cook prepare a selection. I wasn't certain of your preferences." The sideboard indeed held an impressive array: eggs, kippers, toast, preserves, fruit, pastries that looked suspiciously French. Catalina selected toast and tea. Her appetite remained absent and settled at the table. The Duke joined her, his own plate containing what appeared to be enough food to sustain a small army. "You eat like a soldier," Catalina observed. He paused mid-reach for the marmalade. "I beg your pardon?" "The quantity, very substantial." She gestured at his plate. "In Spain we would consider that several meals." "Ah, yes. I often forget breakfast during the morning, so I've learned to eat sufficiently when I remember." "You forget meals?" Catalina's tone conveyed her opinion of this practice. "Occasionally, when occupied with estate matters or—" He stopped, apparently realizing he was justifying himself to a woman he'd met while she was unconscious. "It's an unfortunate habit." "It's an unhealthy one," Catalina corrected. "You should establish regular meal times. Your body requires consistent nourishment." The Duke stared at her, clearly unaccustomed to being scolded about his eating habits. "I thank you for your concern." "You're welcome." They ate in silence for several moments. Catalina studied him covertly over her teacup. In daylight, he was even more attractive than her initial assessment, though attractive seemed an inadequate word for the combination of sharp features, evident intelligence, and that fascinating hint of discomfort with his own authority. He seemed like someone playing the role of a duke rather than inhabiting it naturally. "Your Grace," she ventured, "may I ask an impertinent question?" He looked wary. "That depends on the question's degree of impertinence. Do you enjoy being a duke?" Whatever he'd expected, it wasn't that. His teacup paused halfway to his lips. "That's an unusual inquiry. But not forbidden." "No, merely unexpected." He set down the cup, considering. "I've never contemplated whether enjoyment factors into the equation. I am the Duke of Northmoor. It's not a position one enjoys or dislikes. It simply is." "That sounds dreadfully boring." "It's responsible," he corrected. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." A genuine smile crossed his face, brief but transformative. "You make an excellent point, Lady Catalina." "I frequently do. Usually people are too polite to acknowledge it. I'm discovering that politeness may be overrated." "It's certainly overused," Catalina agreed. She nibbled her toast, then asked, "What would you do if you weren't a duke?" "I am a duke. The question is hypothetical." "Precisely. Hypothetical questions are the most interesting kind." He studied her with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. "Do you interrogate all your rescuers this way?" "I've never been rescued before. I'm improvising." "Improvising," she says. He shook his head, but amusement lingered in his expression. "Very well. Hypothetically, if I weren't a duke, I suppose I might pursue architecture. I've always found buildings fascinating. How structures are designed, how spaces are shaped, the marriage of function and beauty." "Architecture," Catalina repeated, surprised. "Not estate management, not politics?" "Those are what dukes do. You asked what I would do." "So I did." She regarded him with new appreciation. "You should design a building." "I hardly think—" "Why not? You're a duke. You can do whatever you wish." "That's not precisely how dukedoms function. Then they function incorrectly." Henry, she'd begun thinking of him as Henry, though propriety forbade using his Christian name, looked genuinely nonplussed. "You're quite unlike anyone I've ever met." "I'll accept that as a compliment." It was intended as one. Their eyes met across the breakfast table, and something shifted, subtle but unmistakable, like a door opening in a previously sealed room. The moment broke when Henderson entered, carrying a silver salver. "Your Grace," a message from the Claridge Hotel. Henry accepted the note, scanning its contents. His expression tightened. "News?" Catalina asked. "They've confirmed a Lady Catalina de Montemayor is registered as a guest, along with a Señorita Elena Vasquez." He looked up. "Your companion, I presume?" "Yes, Elena." Relief flooded through her. "They know where I am." "The message was in response to our inquiries. Apparently, Señorita Vasquez reported you missing last evening and has been conducting searches." His tone carried disapproval. "Rather lackadaisical of her, considering she was meant to be chaperoning you." Catalina felt a flash of defensiveness for Eleanor, despite not quite remembering why Eleanor had been absent at the fair. She may have had good reason. "Indeed." Henry's skepticism was evident. "Regardless, I'll send word immediately that you're safe and in respectable hands." "Are you respectable?" Catalina asked innocently. Exceedingly, he replied seriously. I have references. She laughed. Couldn't help it. The sound surprised them both. I'm beginning to suspect you enjoy being scandalized, Catalina observed. I enjoy nothing of the sort. I'm simply unaccustomed to house guests who question my eating habits and mock my respectability. Then your previous house guests were dreadfully dull. They were appropriately decorous, Henry corrected, but his mouth twitched toward a smile. Henderson cleared his throat delicately. Shall I send the message to the Claridge, Your Grace? Yes. Inform them that Lady Catalina is recovering comfortably at Northmoor House and may return once Dr. Phillips confirms she's fit to travel. He glanced at Catalina. Unless you wish to return immediately. She should say yes. Propriety demanded it. Her father would expect it. Whatever purpose had brought her to London, still maddeningly out of reach in her memory, surely required her presence. But looking at Henry across the breakfast table, sunshine illuminating his serious face, she found herself reluctant to leave this unexpected sanctuary. Perhaps another day, she heard herself say, to ensure complete recovery. Very sensible, Henry agreed, expression carefully neutral. Henderson departed. Catalina finished her tea, aware of the Duke studying her with that same focused attention he'd directed at his breakfast earlier, as though she were a particularly complex problem requiring careful analysis. What are you thinking? She asked. I'm wondering what brings a Spanish lady to London in December without her family, chaperoned by someone apparently prone to losing her charges at Christmas fairs. As am I, Catalina admitted. As soon as I remember, I'll inform you. I look forward to it. He rose, setting down his napkin. In the meantime, please consider Northmoor House at your disposal. The library is extensive if you enjoy reading. The gardens are pleasant despite the snow. If you require anything, I'll ring for Mrs. Davies, Catalina finished. You've mentioned. Thank you, Your Grace. He paused at the door. Henry. She blinked. I beg your pardon? My name is Henry. He looked vaguely embarrassed. If we're to be temporary housemates, perpetual formality seems excessive. Warmth spread through her chest, unexpected and entirely inappropriate. Then you must call me Catalina. Catalina, he repeated, testing the syllables. It suits you. Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the sunny morning room with the remnants of breakfast and a heart that had started beating in a rather concerning manner. This, Catalina thought, was becoming complicated. Delightfully, terribly complicated. The next 3 days passed in what Henry could only describe as orchestrated chaos, masquerading as respectability. Catalina remained at Northmoor House. Dr. Phillips insisted she needed rest. Her memory remained frustratingly incomplete, and Elena, upon arriving to collect her charge, proved so spectacularly useless as a chaperone that Henry felt morally obligated to keep Catalina under his own, significantly more competent protection. But Lord Whitmore was being so attentive, Elena had protested when Henry questioned her absence from the fair, and he specifically asked me to view the fabric merchants with him. How could I refuse a lord? By using the word no, Henry had suggested dryly, a useful term in many situations. Eleanor, a fluttery woman of perhaps 40, with more romantic aspirations than practical sense, had gazed at him with incomprehension. But Your Grace, one doesn't simply refuse a lord's invitation. One does when one is meant to be chaperoning a young lady at a public fair. The argument had proved futile. Elena possessed approximately the same supervisory instincts as decorative shrubbery. After determining that Catalina's father had chosen Elena primarily for her lack of objectionable qualities, rather than any actual competence, Henry had suggested, firmly, that Catalina would recover more quickly in stable surroundings. Eleanor, already planning her next encounter with Lord Whitmore, had agreed with suspicious enthusiasm. Thus Catalina became Henry's houseguest, properly chaperoned by Mrs. Davies and the entire household staff, naturally. No scandal whatsoever. The scandal, of course, was already spreading through London, like influenza through a boarding school. They're calling you the Christmas Samaritan, his sister Margaret informed him gleefully over tea 2 days after Catalina's arrival. Some say you rescued a dying Spanish princess. Others claim she's a notorious actress fleeing a scorned lover. Lady Pemberton swears she's actually a French spy masquerading as Spanish nobility. She's none of those things, Henry said wearily. She's a Spanish lady who fainted at the Christmas fair, suffered temporary memory loss and has nowhere else to stay while recovering. How romantic. How medically complicated. Margaret smirked over her teacup. She possessed their father's sharp features and their mother's sharper wit, a combination that made her simultaneously Henry's favorite person and most persistent tormentor. You like her, Margaret observed. I barely know her. You know her well enough to house her, feed her and, according to the morning gossip, promenade with her through your gardens yesterday afternoon. She wanted fresh air. The physician recommended gentle exercise. How thoughtful of you to personally ensure her exercise remained gentle. Henry set down his cup with excessive care. Margaret, I am providing temporary accommodation to a woman in distress, that is all. Of course, brother, and I'm the Queen of Bavaria. Before Henry could formulate a suitable retort, the door opened and Catalina herself appeared, accompanied by Mrs. Davies. Oh, I apologize. I didn't realize you had visitors. Catalina paused in the doorway, looking genuinely contrite. She wore a day dress of deep green wool, borrowed from Margaret's extensive wardrobe, as her own luggage remained at the Claridge, and had arranged her hair in a simpler style that somehow made her look both younger and more approachable. Henry rose immediately. Not at all. Lady Catalina, may I present my sister, Lady Margaret Thornbury. Margaret, this is Lady Catalina de Montemayor. Margaret's expression transformed from mischievous to genuinely warm. She stood, crossing to Catalina with outstretched hands. How wonderful to finally meet the mysterious lady who's turned my brother's orderly life into chaos. I've been absolutely desperate for details. Catalina accepted the hands, smiling. I'm afraid the details are rather mundane. I fainted, your brother rescued me, and I've been inconveniencing him ever since. Inconveniencing, Margaret repeated, shooting Henry a significant look. Interesting word choice. Because it's accurate, Henry said firmly. Lady Catalina, would you care to join us for tea? If I'm not intruding. Nonsense, Margaret declared, steering Catalina toward the settee with the ease of someone used to managing social situations. You're the guest of honor. I want to hear everything. How you're finding England, what you think of London, whether my brother has bored you to tears with architectural discussions yet. He hasn't, Catalina said, settling gracefully, though he did explain the structural principles of load-bearing walls yesterday, which was surprisingly interesting. Margaret looked delighted. Did he? Henry, you explained load-bearing walls. She asked about the house's construction, Henry defended, reclaiming his seat. I merely answered her question. For 20 minutes, Catalina added helpfully. Very thoroughly. I'm thorough, Henry muttered into his tea. The afternoon that followed proved simultaneously entertaining and mildly tortuous. Margaret and Catalina discovered an immediate rapport, bonding over shared opinions about English weather. Persistently grey, Catalina observed, like living inside a dishcloth. The absurdity of current fashion. Why do sleeves require their own scaffolding, Margaret demanded, and the general stuffiness of London society. Everyone so concerned with propriety they've forgotten how to enjoy themselves, Catalina noted. Henry, accustomed to being the primary focus of Margaret's attention during her visits, found himself relegated to occasional participant as the two women dissected everything from literature to politics to the correct way to make hot chocolate, a topic on which they disagreed vehemently, much to his amusement. But you know what Henry needs? Margaret announced suddenly during a lull in conversation. What's that? Catalina asked. To laugh more. He's far too serious. I'm appropriately serious, Henry protested. I have responsibilities. You have responsibilities and no joy, Margaret corrected. There's a difference. I find joy in my work. You find satisfaction in your work. Joy is something else entirely. Catalina studied him thoughtfully. What brings you joy, Henry? The question, simple as it was, stopped him. When had anyone last asked him that? When had he last considered it? He paused, genuinely uncertain. I enjoy architecture, as mentioned, and riding. The estates produce satisfaction when well managed. Those are things you find acceptable, Catalina observed. Not things that bring joy. What's the difference? Joy makes you forget yourself, she said simply. Makes you lose track of time. Makes you feel more alive than ordinary existence. Margaret looked triumphant. Exactly. Catalina understands. "And what brings you joy?" Henry asked, deflecting. Catalina's expression softened. "Dancing. Proper Spanish dancing, not the rigid English country dances. Music, guitar especially. Watching sunrise over the olive groves at my father's estate. Heated debates about literature with people who disagree with me." "You enjoy arguing?" Henry asked. "I enjoy passionate discussion." "There's a difference." "She has a point," Margaret murmured. The conversation shifted to other topics, but the question lingered in Henry's mind. What brought him joy? Later, after Margaret departed with promises to return soon, "To ensure you're not driving poor Catalina mad with architectural lectures," she'd said cheerfully, Henry found himself alone with Catalina in the library. She'd discovered his collection of travel narratives and sat curled in his favorite chair, unconsciously claimed apparently, as cats claimed sunny spots, completely absorbed in someone's account of journeying through the Ottoman Empire. Henry entered quietly, intending to retrieve a book, but found himself simply watching her read. She bit her lower lip when concentrating, he noticed. Occasionally muttered to herself in Spanish, usually what sounded like disagreements with the author's conclusions. Her fingers traced passages as she read, as though trying to physically absorb the words. "You're staring," she said, without looking up. Henry started, embarrassed at being caught. "I apologize, I was simply noting your absorption in the text. It's quite good, though the author has ridiculous opinions about Turkish architecture." She looked up, marking her place with one finger. "Did you need the library? I can vacate—" "No, please, stay." She returned to her book. Henry collected his intended volume, a treatise on estate management that he'd been meaning to finish, and settled in the chair opposite. They read in companionable silence as afternoon light faded to evening, the library growing progressively darker, until Mrs. Davies arrived to light the lamps. "Dinner will be served in an hour, Your Grace," she informed them. "Shall I inform cook you'll be dining together?" Henry glanced at Catalina, who'd looked up from her book. "If Lady Catalina doesn't object to my company, I think I can tolerate it," Catalina said gravely, "provided you don't discuss load-bearing walls during the meal." "I make no promises." After Mrs. Davies departed, Catalina set aside her book. "May I ask you something?" "Of course. Why haven't you married?" The question, characteristically direct, caught him off guard. "That's rather personal." "You've seen me in my chemise," Catalina pointed out. "I think we've moved beyond conventional boundaries." "Fair point." Henry considered how to answer. "I suppose I haven't found anyone who—" "Fit." "Fit what?" "My life, my responsibilities. Someone who understood what being a duchess entails. The duties, the expectations, the loss of privacy and personal autonomy." "That sounds dreadful." "It's reality for someone in my position." Catalina tilted her head, studying him. "Has it occurred to you that you're approaching marriage like a business contract rather than a partnership?" "Marriage at my level is a business contract." "It doesn't have to be." "Says the woman who can't remember why she's in England," Henry countered, then immediately wished he could retract the words. "I apologize. That was unkind." But Catalina only laughed. "No, you're quite right. I'm hardly in a position to offer romantic advice when I can't even access my own recent history." "Has nothing returned? No memories of the days before the fair?" Her expression clouded. "Fragments. I remember arriving in London, the Claridge Hotel's terrible mattresses, Elena chattering about English society. But the purpose, the reason Father sent me here, remains blank. It's extraordinarily frustrating. Dr. Phillips said forcing it would prove counterproductive. I know, but patience has never been my strength." "I've noticed," Henry said dryly. They smiled at each other across the lamplight, and Henry felt something shift in his chest, a sensation both alarming and unexpectedly welcome. This was dangerous. Catalina would remember soon, would return to whatever life awaited her, and he would resume his carefully ordered existence. Allowing attachment would only complicate matters. Yet even knowing this, he couldn't quite force himself to maintain proper distance. Christmas Day arrived with fresh snow and unexpected guests. Henry woke to Henderson's apologetic voice outside his door. "Your Grace, I'm terribly sorry to disturb you, but there are persons at the door demanding to see Lady Catalina." Henry emerged from his bedroom in a dressing gown, mind still foggy with sleep. "What sort of persons?" "Foreign gentlemen, Your Grace, very insistent. They claim to be Lady Catalina's family. That cleared the fog instantly. Where are they now? I've placed them in the entrance hall. They're becoming increasingly vocal. Henry descended the stairs to find three men who radiated fury with such intensity that the very air seemed to vibrate. The eldest, perhaps 60, with steel-grey hair and a face carved from aristocratic granite, stood in the center, flanked by two younger men. All three wore traveling clothes and expressions that suggested they'd very much like to horsewhip someone, preferably Henry. "Gentlemen," Henry said, descending with as much ducal authority as one could muster while wearing a dressing gown. "I'm the Duke of Northmore. How may I assist you?" The eldest man spoke, his English heavily accented but clear. "I am Don Fernando de Montemayor, Marquess of Valcázar. I understand you have my daughter." Henry's stomach sank. "Lady Catalina is indeed recovering here, under proper supervision following a medical emergency. If you'll wait in the drawing room, I'll have her summoned." "We will see her immediately," Don Fernando interrupted, "and we will have explanations, many explanations." One of the younger men stepped forward, handsome in a conventional way, fair-haired, expression thunderous. "Where is my betrothed?" Betrothed. The word hit Henry like cold water. "Your—" "Pardon?" "Lord Percival Harrington," the man said shortly. "Lady Catalina's intended husband. Now, if you please, take us to her immediately." The third man, older than Percival, with the same fair colouring, added, "I am Reginald Harrington, Marquess of Kennington, Percival's father. We've been searching for Lady Catalina since Christmas Eve, when she vanished from the fair. Imagine our distress to discover she's been residing unchaperoned in a bachelor's residence." "She's been perfectly chaperoned," Henry said, fighting to keep his voice level even as his world tilted sideways. "My housekeeper has attended her at all times." "A housekeeper is not an appropriate chaperone for an engaged woman," Don Fernando said coldly. "Where is Eleanor?" "Señorita Vasquez proved incompetent," Henry replied. "She's the reason Lady Catalina was unattended when she collapsed." "Nevertheless—" "Henry?" They all turned. Catalina stood at the top of the stairs, wrapped in a borrowed dressing gown, hair loose around her shoulders, looking confused and vulnerable and utterly beautiful. "What's happening?" she asked. "Who are these men?" Don Fernando's expression crumbled. "Mija, do you not recognize me?" Catalina descended slowly, studying the faces. "I'm sorry. Should I?" "Catalina," Don Fernando said, voice breaking. "I'm your father." She stopped 3 steps from the bottom, hand gripping the banister. "My father?" "Yes." He moved forward, hands outstretched. "Don Fernando, we traveled from Seville together 2 weeks ago." Catalina's face had gone pale. She looked at the other men, then at Henry, eyes wide and lost. "And these men," she whispered. Percival stepped forward. "I'm Lord Percival Harrington, your betrothed. We're to be married in 3 days, Catalina, on the 28th of December." The world stopped. Catalina swayed. Henry moved instinctively, reaching her side just as her legs gave out, steadying her against him. "Catalina." She looked up at him, and the pain in her eyes was devastating. "I remember," she whispered, and Henry's heart, which had been foolishly opening itself to impossible possibilities, shattered like glass. Catalina sat in Northmore House's formal drawing room, surrounded by men discussing her future as though she were furniture requiring appropriate placement. Her memory had returned completely, a flood of recollection triggered by Percival's announcement. She remembered everything now, the arranged marriage, the negotiations between her father and Lord Kennington, the journey to England, the suffocating panic at the Christmas fair that had caused her to faint. She had no engagement ring on. She must have lost it during the commotion at the Christmas market. She remembered why she'd been so desperate to escape. "The wedding preparations are complete," Lord Kennington was saying, consulting a pocket notebook. "St. George's is reserved for the 28th. The Archbishop has been notified. Guests have been invited. The marriage contracts were signed 3 months ago." "Then we proceed as planned," her father agreed. "This unfortunate incident need not disrupt arrangements." "With respect," Henry interjected, the first words he'd spoken since they'd all relocated to the drawing room. "Lady Catalina has been unconscious and suffering memory loss. Perhaps wedding dates should be reconsidered." "Dr. Phillips has confirmed her recovered," Lord Kennington said dismissively. "There's no medical impediment." "But the Duke's concern is noted," Don Fernando interrupted, his tone making clear exactly how little that concern mattered. However, family matters are not his province. Catalina watched Henry's jaw tighten. He stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, looking every inch the powerful Duke, except for the helplessness in his eyes. Their eyes met across the room. She saw the question there. "What do you want?" The problem was she knew exactly what she wanted, and it was impossible. Percival, to his credit, looked almost as uncomfortable as Catalina felt. He'd positioned himself near the windows, studying the snow-covered gardens with apparent fascination. Since the initial announcement of their engagement, he'd barely looked at her. "Perhaps," Percival ventured hesitantly, "we might postpone briefly? Allow Catalina time to fully recover?" "Nonsense," his father declared. "The girl is perfectly well, and delays would only fuel more speculation about this scandal." "What scandal?" Henry asked dangerously. "A betrothed woman spending 3 days in a bachelor's residence," Lord Kennington said coldly. "I'm quite certain we can all imagine the gossip." "Nothing improper occurred," Henry said, each word precisely enunciated. "I'm quite certain the Duke acted as a perfect gentleman," Don Fernando agreed. "Nevertheless, appearances matter. The sooner Catalina is properly wed, the sooner this unfortunate incident can be forgotten." Catalina found her voice. "I am in the room, Father. Perhaps someone might ask my opinion?" All 4 men looked at her with varying degrees of surprise, as though a piece of furniture had suddenly developed speech. "Of course, mija," her father said in Spanish, his tone gentling, "but you know this marriage is necessary. The agreements were made. Your future is secured." "My future is decided, you mean?" Catalina replied, also in Spanish. "Without my consultation." "You agreed to the arrangement," he reminded her. Had she? Catalina searched her newly restored memories. She remembered her father presenting the proposal, a marriage to an English lord, uniting their families, securing trade agreements that would benefit both estates. She remembered feeling trapped, overwhelmed, unable to articulate objections that sounded rational rather than purely emotional. She'd agreed because refusing felt impossible, not because she'd actually wanted to. "The decision stands," Don Fernando declared, switching back to English. "We'll return to the Claridge today. The wedding will proceed as planned." "Wait," Henry said sharply. All eyes turned to him. He looked at Catalina, and something in his expression made her heart ache. "Does Lady Catalina wish to marry Lord Harrington?" The question hung in the air like gunpowder. "That's irrelevant," Lord Kennington sputtered. "The contracts—" "I'm asking her," Henry interrupted, still holding Catalina's gaze. "Not the contracts. Her." Catalina felt the weight of 4 male gazes. Her father's, expectant and firm. Lord Kennington's, coldly disapproving. Percival's, surprisingly sympathetic. And Henry's, Henry's eyes held everything she couldn't say aloud. Hope, desperation, and the terrible knowledge that wanting something didn't make it possible. She swallowed hard. "I barely know Lord Harrington." "You'll have a lifetime to know each other," her father said, as though this resolved everything. "That's not an answer to the Duke's question," Percival said quietly. Everyone looked at him in surprise. "I beg your pardon?" his father demanded. Percival finally turned from the window, meeting Catalina's eyes directly for the first time. "The Duke asked if Catalina wishes to marry me. She said she doesn't know me. That's not the same as saying yes." "Percival, and frankly," Percival continued, gathering momentum like a man who'd finally decided to speak after years of silence, "I'm not certain I wish to marry someone who doesn't wish to marry me." Silence. Lord Kennington's face had gone purple. "You cannot be serious." "I'm entirely serious, Father. I've gone along with this arrangement because you insisted it was beneficial for the family. But looking at Lady Catalina now, seeing her expression, I realize we're both being sacrificed to benefit everyone except ourselves." "Percival," Catalina breathed, seeing him properly for the first time. "You don't want this marriage either." He smiled ruefully. "I want my father's approval. I want to fulfill my duties. But marry a woman who looks at another man the way you look at the Duke?" He shook his head. "That seems a recipe for mutual misery." "How I look at—" Catalina stopped, heat flooding her cheeks. "Oh, don't pretend," Percival said, not unkindly. "It's written all over both your faces. Has been since we arrived." Henry made a strangled sound. Catalina couldn't look at him. "This is absurd," Lord Kennington declared. "Percival, you will honor the agreement." "Or what?" Percival asked. "You'll disinherit me? Cut me off?" "Those threats worked when I was 20, Father. I'm 32. I have my own income, my own estate. I don't need your approval anymore." The declaration clearly shocked everyone, including Percival himself. He straightened his shoulders, looking simultaneously terrified and liberated. "I won't marry her," he said firmly. "Not if she doesn't want me, and she doesn't. Anyone with eyes can see that." Don Fernando turned to Catalina, expression thunderous. "Is this true? You formed an attachment to this duke?" Catalina's mind raced. What could she say? That yes, she'd fallen absurdly, impossibly in love with Henry Ashbourne during 3 days of conversation and laughter, and discovering that someone actually enjoyed her directness rather than being appalled by it. That the thought of marrying Percival, kind as he seemed, felt like accepting a lifetime of half-existence. "I barely know him," she said instead, which was simultaneously true and the greatest understatement of her life. "Then the marriage to Lord Harrington proceeds," her father declared. "No," Percival said, "it doesn't." "You cannot simply dissolve an engagement," Lord Kennington sputtered. "There are contracts, agreements, your signature." "Then sue me for breach of contract," Percival said calmly. "I'll pay whatever penalties are required, but I won't marry her." Henry, who'd been silent through this exchange, finally spoke. "Lord Harrington, while I appreciate your integrity, you realize this decision will cause considerable scandal?" "Less than forcing an unwanted marriage," Percival replied. "Besides, scandal passes. Miserable marriages last forever." "You're mad," his father declared. "Both of you. Throwing away a perfectly suitable arrangement because of sentimental nonsense." "It's not nonsense," Henry interrupted quietly. "It's possibly the sanest thing I've heard anyone say this morning." Their eyes met, Percival's and Henry's, and something passed between them, an understanding that transcended social position and circumstance. Don Fernando turned to Catalina, switching to rapid Spanish. "You will return to the hotel. We will find another match. This scandal must be contained." "Father, I will not discuss this further. You've embarrassed the family, embarrassed yourself. We leave immediately." He strode toward the door. Lord Kennington followed, still muttering about contracts and scandal, and the general decline of civilized society. Percival paused beside Catalina, speaking quietly. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Lady Catalina, and I hope you're brave enough to choose it, even when it's terrifying." Then he was gone, leaving Catalina alone with Henry. The silence stretched between them, filled with everything they couldn't say. "Catalina," Henry began. "Don't," she whispered. "Please don't make this harder. I don't understand. Percival released you from the engagement. You're free." "I'm not free," she laughed bitterly. "I'm a Spanish lady with a scandal attached to my name, no marriage prospects, and a father who's furious with me. How is that freedom?" "You could stay," Henry said desperately. "Here with me." Catalina's heart cracked. "As what? Your mistress? That would only compound the scandal." "As my wife." The words fell between them like stones into still water, creating ripples that reached everything. Catalina stared at him. "You cannot be serious." "I'm entirely serious. Marry me. Today, if possible. It would solve everything. Prevent scandal. Provide you protection. Answer all the questions about propriety." "Stop." Catalina stood abruptly, putting distance between them. "You don't want to marry me, Henry. You want to protect me. There's a difference." "You think I don't want you?" His voice roughened. "Catalina, I've spent 3 days trying desperately not to want you. It's been spectacularly unsuccessful. Wanting someone and building a life with them are entirely different things," she countered, fighting tears. "You said yourself marriage at your level is a business contract. You need someone who understands English society, who can be a proper duchess." "I need someone who makes me laugh," Henry interrupted. "Someone who argues with travel writers and tells me I eat too much breakfast and looks at architecture the way other people look at art. Someone who makes me forget to be proper and remember to be happy." "Henry, I love you," he said simply. "I realize that's absurdly premature and completely irrational and thoroughly inconvenient, but it's true nonetheless. I love you, Catalina, and I hope, you might feel the same." She did. Heaven help her. She absolutely did. Had probably started falling for him the moment he'd awkwardly explained load-bearing walls with such earnest enthusiasm. Had definitely been lost when he'd smiled at her across the breakfast table and admitted he'd rather design buildings than manage estates. But love didn't solve everything. "My father will never approve," she whispered. "Then don't ask his approval. Choose for yourself." "I've never chosen anything for myself." "Then perhaps it's time to start." Catalina looked at him, this proper reserved duke who'd opened his home to a stranger, who'd defended her to powerful men, who'd somehow managed to make her feel seen and valued in ways she'd never experienced before. Choosing him meant scandal, meant defying her father, meant stepping into an uncertain future with no guarantee of success. But it also meant choosing herself, choosing happiness. Choosing the terrifying, wonderful possibility of building a life with someone who actually wanted her. Not her dowry, not her connections, not her usefulness in trade negotiations. Her. "If I agree to this madness," she said slowly, "I have conditions." Hope blazed in Henry's eyes. "Name them." "First, we must speak to my father together. I won't have him thinking I was coerced or seduced." "Agreed." "Second, I want a genuine partnership. Not a marriage where you make all decisions and I decorate your drawing rooms. I wouldn't dream of sidelining someone who argues with architectural principles." "Third," she paused, gathering courage, "if we do this, I need to know it's because you genuinely want me, Henry. Not because you're rescuing me. I don't need saving. I need choosing." He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, cupping her face gently. "Catalina de Montemayor, I am absolutely choosing you. Enthusiastically, terrifyingly, completely choosing you. Despite the scandal, despite the complications, despite the fact that I've known you less than a week, and this is possibly the most impulsive decision I've ever made." "You're certain?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." She kissed him, or he kissed her, or they met somewhere in the middle in a collision of mouths and hope, and the terrifying joy of choosing the improbable. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, Catalina rested her forehead against his. "We're going to cause such a scandal." "Catastrophic," Henry agreed. "People will talk for years. My father will disown me. Margaret will be insufferably smug. The papers will have a field day. It'll be absolutely horrible." They looked at each other and started laughing, the kind of slightly hysterical laughter that came from making decisions that were simultaneously terrible and wonderful. "We should probably stop this," Catalina managed between giggles. "Be sensible adults." "Probably," Henry agreed. "Shall we?" "Absolutely not." He kissed her again, and Catalina thought that perhaps reckless, impulsive, scandalous decisions were sometimes exactly right. Convincing Don Fernando proved every bit as difficult as anticipated. "You've known him 4 days," her father thundered in Spanish, pacing the drawing room like a caged lion. 4 days, Catalina." "I knew Percival less than 4 hours," Catalina countered, also in Spanish, while Henry watched from beside her with an expression that suggested he was following the gist, if not the details. "You expected me to marry him. That was different. That was arranged. This is passion and foolishness. This is choosing my own future, father." "Choosing scandal, you mean?" Henry cleared his throat. "Marquis, if I may—" "You may not," Don Fernando snapped in English. "You've compromised my daughter." "I've done nothing of the sort," Henry said firmly. "Lady Catalina has been properly chaperoned every moment she's been under my roof. My housekeeper, Mrs. Davies, can attest to that, as can my entire staff. Appearances matter more than truth in these situations. Then let me repair appearances by marrying her, with your blessing if possible, but without it if necessary." The boldness of the declaration seemed to rob Don Fernando of speech. He stared at Henry, then at Catalina, then at the ceiling as though seeking divine intervention. "You're a duke," he said finally. "Yes, my daughter is the daughter of a marquess. We are not social equals." "In England, a duke outranks a marquess," Henry said carefully. This information clearly displeased Don Fernando further. "So you're saying my daughter would be elevated? She would be a duchess, yes." More ceiling staring, Catalina held her breath. "The Duke of Northmore," her father said slowly. "I've heard the name. Your estates are substantial." "Quite substantial, yes." Your reputation? Impeccable. Before this week, at least. Despite himself, Don Fernando's mouth twitched. He looked at Catalina, expression softening slightly. You truly want this, Mija? This English duke with his serious face and his rescue complex? I truly want him, father. Not for his title, not for his estates. For himself. That's the most foolish reason to marry someone. Or the only good reason, Catalina countered. Father and daughter regarded each other across the drawing room. Finally, Don Fernando sighed, a sound of defeat and resignation and possibly understanding. Your mother would have loved this chaos, he muttered. She always said you needed someone who could keep pace with your spirit. He looked at Henry. Can you keep pace with her, Duke? I intend to try, sir. She's argumentative. I've noticed. Opinionated. Refreshingly so. Has absolutely no sense of proper decorum. I'm learning to appreciate that quality. Don Fernando's expression softened further. You love her. Desperately, sir. And you understand that if you hurt her, I will personally ensure your estates become mysteriously infested with every pest Spain has to offer. That seems fair. Catalina looked between them, hardly daring to believe what seemed to be happening. Her father turned to her. 3 conditions. Name them, she said immediately. First, you must marry immediately. Today, if possible. I won't have scandal destroying your reputation. Agreed. Henry, I'll obtain a special license. We can marry this afternoon. Second, Don Fernando continued, you will write to your aunts and explain this yourself. I won't face their wrath alone. Gladly, father. Third, he paused, emotion crossing his face. You must visit Spain regularly. I've already lost your mother. I cannot bear losing you entirely. Catalina crossed to him, taking his hands. You could never lose me, father. England is not the moon. We'll visit often. Don Fernando pulled her into a fierce embrace, muttering in Spanish about headstrong daughters and patient saints, and whether wine at this hour would be inappropriate. When he released her, his eyes were suspiciously bright. You're certain about this, Mija? Truly certain? More certain than I've been about anything, Catalina assured him. Then he turned to Henry, drawing himself up formally. Duke of Northmoor, you have my blessing to marry my daughter. May you both find the happiness you deserve, and may you have the patience of Job because you'll need it. Thank you, sir, Henry said gravely, though his eyes danced with amusement. Now leave, Don Fernando commanded. Both of you. I need to write very difficult letters to people who will blame me for this entire situation. Also, I require strong brandy. They married that afternoon in a quiet ceremony at Henry's estate chapel, with Margaret as witness, Mrs. Davies crying happy tears, and Henderson maintaining perfect butler composure, despite obvious pleasure. The special license had been acquired through connections Henry normally reserved for parliamentary emergencies. The Archbishop's representative had raised eyebrows at the haste, but ultimately agreed to perform the ceremony. Catalina wore a dress borrowed from Margaret, ivory silk with Spanish lace that Margaret had apparently been saving for precisely such an occasion. I knew you'd need it eventually, she'd declared with suspicious prescience. Henry wore formal attire that made him look impossibly handsome and slightly terrified, which Catalina found endearing. The vows were traditional. The ring, a family heirloom Henry's mother had worn, fit perfectly, and when the representative pronounced them married and Henry kissed her, Catalina felt something settle in her chest, like a piece of herself she hadn't known was missing, finally sliding into place. Well, Your Grace, Henry murmured against her lips. Ready for scandal? Absolutely, Catalina breathed. They emerged from the chapel to find snow falling gently over the gardens, transforming the world into something clean and new and full of possibility. Margaret hugged Catalina fiercely. Welcome to the family. I'm delighted to finally have a sister with sense. I've made sensible decisions before, Henry protested. Name one. Marrying Catalina. That was reckless, impulsive, and potentially catastrophic, Margaret corrected. Also the first interesting thing you've done in years. I approve entirely. The celebration that followed was small but joyful, a dinner featuring both English and Spanish dishes. Cook had risen magnificently to the challenge, wine that Don Fernando had contributed from his private collection, and toasts that ranged from heartfelt to hilariously inappropriate. To my brother, Margaret declared, raising her glass. who finally learned that life's best decisions are the ones that terrify you. To my daughter, Don Fernando added, who has more courage than sense. May her new husband develop both quickly. To my wife, Henry said quietly, his eyes on Catalina, who taught me that joy matters more than propriety, and that the best rescues are mutual. Catalina felt tears prick her eyes. She raised her own glass. To my husband, who caught me when I fell, literally and metaphorically, and somehow convinced me that choosing happiness wasn't selfish, it was necessary. Later, alone in their chambers, they stood together watching the snow transform the city into something magical, and Catalina thought about the strange path that had led her here, fainting at a Christmas fair, waking in a stranger's house, falling in love with a reserved duke who'd somehow become her partner in choosing an improbable future. "Do you suppose people will ever let us forget how we met?" she asked. "Not remotely," Henry said cheerfully. "We'll be the cautionary tale parents tell their daughters. Don't faint in crowded markets, dear, or you might accidentally marry a duke. Worse fates exist, considerably worse." She turned in his arms, looking up at him. "Thank you." "For what?" "For catching me, for choosing me, for being brave enough to propose something completely mad. Thank you for being mad enough to accept." They kissed as snow fell outside, and the fire crackled warmly, and somewhere in London gossip was already spreading about the Duke of Northmoor's shocking, scandalous, wonderfully improbable Christmas wedding. But inside Northmoor House, two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances were too busy discovering the joy of choosing happiness to care about scandal at all. 1 year later, the Christmas fair at Berkeley Square bloomed with the same chaotic festivity as the previous year. Garlands draped between lampposts, vendors hawked their wares, and snow fell gently over the crowds. Henry and Catalina walked through it together, her hand tucked into his arm, both warmly dressed against the cold. "Are you certain you want to do this?" Henry asked for the third time. "Absolutely," Catalina assured him. "It's tradition now. We've only done it once." "That doesn't constitute tradition. Once is how traditions start." They stopped at the ribbon merchant's stall, the same stall where 1 year ago disaster had struck in the form of an inconvenient fainting spell. The merchant recognized them immediately. His eyes widened. "Your Graces, how wonderful to see you again." "Good afternoon, Mr. Matthews," Catalina said warmly. "We've come to purchase ribbons, and perhaps to commemorate the spot where my husband first distinguished himself as the most awkward rescuer in English history." Henry sighed. "Must you tell everyone that story?" "Always," Catalina said cheerfully. She turned to the merchant. "Did you know he dropped 3 packages and nearly fell into a water trough?" "I caught you," Henry protested. "Eventually, after I slid through your arms like buttered silk, according to witnesses." Mr. Matthews laughed delightedly. "It's become quite the local legend, Your Grace. They say the Duke of Northmoor performed the most ungraceful rescue in aristocratic history and still managed to win the lady's heart. Despite all evidence suggesting I should have fled," Catalina agreed. Henry looked between them, expression resigned but amused. "I'm never living this down, am I?" "Not remotely," Catalina confirmed. They purchased ribbons, far more than any reasonable person required, and continued through the fair. Everywhere they went, people recognized them. The scandalous Duke and Duchess who'd married within days of meeting, defying convention and propriety and every sensible social guideline. A year later, society had mostly forgiven them. The marriage had proved solid, the Duchess charming despite her foreign origin and unfortunate tendency toward directness, and the Duke of Northmoor considerably more approachable than his previous reputation suggested. They'd spent the year dividing time between London and Northmoor's country estates, with extended visits to Spain that had pleased Don Fernando immensely. Catalina had navigated English society with the same directness she'd applied to everything else, winning over even the most skeptical matrons through sheer force of personality. Margaret had become Catalina's closest friend. Eleanor had married Lord Whitmore in the spring, a development that surprised no one who'd witnessed their chemistry at the Christmas fair. Percival had taken himself off to Italy, sending occasional letters that suggested he'd found both purpose and possibly romance in Florence. And Henry and Catalina had discovered that improbable beginnings often led to the strongest foundations. "There's something I need to tell you," Catalina said, as they paused near the chestnut vendor. Henry looked down at her, noting the slight nervousness in her expression. That sounds ominous. Not ominous, merely significant. She took a breath. Dr. Phillips visited yesterday while you were at Parliament. Are you unwell? Quite the opposite. She smiled, eyes bright. I'm pregnant, Henry. We're going to have a child. Henry stopped walking. The fair continued around them, crowds and laughter and vendors calling their wares, but he saw only Catalina, looking simultaneously nervous and radiant. A child, he repeated, barely breathing. In summer, Dr. Phillips estimates, June or July. She searched his face anxiously. Are you pleased? Pleased? Henry laughed, a sound of pure, uncomplicated joy. Catalina, I'm absolutely delighted. Terrified, but delighted. Terrified? I'll have to catch a baby eventually, he pointed out. Given my history with catching things, the child may need protective equipment. She laughed, swatting his arm. You've improved significantly since the Christmas fair. I've had an excellent teacher. They stood together in the falling snow, holding each other while London celebrated around them, and Henry thought about the extraordinary gift of unexpected change, how a moment of chaos, an impulsive decision, a willingness to choose connection over convention had led to this, a life richer and more joyful than he'd ever imagined possible. I love you, he said quietly. You and this impossible, improbable future we're building. I love you too, Catalina replied, even though you still eat too much breakfast and have terrible taste in cravats. My cravats are perfectly respectable. They're terribly boring. Our child will have better fashion sense. Our child will have your spirit and my... What do I have? Patience, Catalina said promptly. You'll need considerable patience raising a child with my spirit. Fair point. They continued through the fair, planning and dreaming and occasionally stopping to purchase things they didn't need, simply because they enjoyed the vendors' stories. As afternoon faded to evening and the lamps began to glow against the gathering darkness, they made their way back to the waiting carriage. Same time next year? Catalina asked, as Henry helped her inside. Absolutely, he agreed. It's tradition. She smiled at him, that brilliant, unreserved smile that still made his heart skip, and Henry thought about how much could change in a year, how much joy could grow from unlikely beginnings. 1 year ago, he'd been a reserved duke, avoiding romantic complications. Now he was a husband, soon-to-be father, and thoroughly reformed skeptic of careful planning. The carriage pulled away from Berkeley Square, carrying them back toward Grosvenor Square through the snowy evening. Thin-side, wrapped in warmth and each other, they planned for their improbable future, with the same enthusiasm they'd brought to their improbable beginning. Because some of life's best moments, they'd discovered, were the ones you never planned at all. The end. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end of this unforgettable love story. From the bottom of our hearts, we hope it brought warmth, hope, and a smile to your day. If you enjoyed it, please like, comment, and share. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to support us. Your support truly means the world and helps us stay motivated to continue telling stories full of love, redemption, and breathtaking twists. At the end of this video, you'll see another suggested story from our channel. Click it and be surprised by more emotional tales just like this one. Thank you for being here, the Legends of Love team.